emergency for the first time in about...
This is Jim, and
Receiving this message. We are Ken Jennings and John Roderick. We speak to you from our present, which we can only assume is your distant past, the turbulent time that was the early 21st century.
Fearing the great cataclysm that will surely befall our civilization, we began this monumental reference of strange and obscure human knowledge. These recordings represent our attempt to compile and preserve wonders and esoterica that would otherwise be lost.
So whether you're listening from an advanced civilization or have just reinvented the technology to decrypt our transmissions, this is our legacy to you.
This is our time capsule. This is the Omnibus. You have accessed entry 391.GN0115, certificate number 35817. The Earth from space.
So the one overwhelming emotion that we carried with us is the fact that we really do all exist on one small globe. And when you get out 240,000 miles, it really isn't a very large Earth.
Is this like a superhero? Like it's the Earth from space?
Pigs in space. Did you draw as a kid? I can't remember if I've ever asked.
Yeah, I did. I drew a lot, but I also doodled. So I tried to.
It's different, right?
Yeah.
Drawing goofy cartoons in the margins is a little different than I'm home and this is my masterpiece.
Yeah, and I would do portraits. I would make my sister sit there while I drew her, and then I started drawing often my sister from her school photographs. I would sit and sketch them. And I took art lessons. I really wanted to learn all the different, and I'm still really curious whenever I see a book or a lesson about illustrations and perspective. I took art history classes. So I was really, and still am. I mean, I don't want to be Danny DeVito or George Bush and like go into oil painting in my retirement. Not that I'll ever retire, but I do sketch. But I also doodled, just doodled everywhere. Yeah. You look at my old notebooks and it's just
I couldn't stop.
Doodles. Did you also draw in addition to doodling?
I did both, and I drew space a lot. I was wondering if this was going to be like a 1977 divide where like I'm totally formed by George Lucas, and you actually remember a world before George Lucas.
Yeah.
Like, did you spend your childhood obsessed with drawing spaceships and rockets and aliens and stuff?
No, I never a single time drew space, an alien, or a starship.
It's not too late.
I did draw.
I mean, you probably had some prog records, so you had Yes album covers.
I drew like Japanese zeros, and
right. That's your tech urge.
Yeah, and I was really really interested in tank battles, so I would draw, doodle like tank war on a, I would draw a landscape and then I would populate it with tanks, and then I would actually act out the battle. I would draw shells being fired. If a tank got hit, I would
draw an explosion
on it. And so at the end,
were you making sounds? Can you make some of the sounds that you would make while you were? This is ASMR.
I have probably, it's sort of like somebody that's able to, like a Bobby McFerrin that can.
You're like beatboxing, but for World War II.
I can do so many different. It's like those videos.
Ken Burns.
Those videos where somebody does all the UK accents and they just switch between them. But I can do all the guns and tanks and airplanes.
Well, it's so rare to find a white dad your age who can do that too.
I don't know. I've never sat around with guys and like, what's your machine gun sound? Because when I hear somebody do a machine gun that doesn't know what machine guns sound like, I'm always like, oh, come on. What is that supposed to be? But I bet you there are a lot of people my age.
You're like, are there no newsreels? It's so funny. I had never thought about this because I could not have been more interested in how X-wing fighter landing gear worked.
Oh.
But if you had asked me about fighter jets, I would be like, when am I going to need that? Like, what's the use of knowing that? I've got X-wing fighters to draw.
Oh, I had a whole shelf of Jane's books.
Oh, of course.
Where it was like, and I also collected cards that were just silhouettes of different aircraft so that I could look at a plane that was 15 miles away.
It's funny. You didn't need Star Wars because you had that.
Yeah.
And I didn't need that because I had Star Wars.
So weird.
They kept coming out with new spaceships because they needed to sell me more toys. And I totally fell for it.
I never once drew a spaceship. Maybe one time, Buck Rogers in the 21st century, the Cylons. Oh, no.
The Battlestar Galactica?
It was Battlestar Galactica. When the television show first came out, the Cylons had an airplane that looked like an airplane. It was modeled on an X-wing, right? But it had a tail. And I may have drawn a Cylon spacecraft.
This is like having the one Wu-Tang record.
Yeah.
Somewhere, somebody should buy the one John Roderick spacecraft original.
Yeah, it's an NFT. But I don't know if any of those survived.
I just drew so many spaceships because why? Part of it was Star Wars and Star Trek, but part of it was growing up in the 70s. You were surrounded by space imagery, like NASA, like actual space exploration. Like, how many times have you seen, growing up on PBS or in an IMAX theater, did you see a shot of like a stage of a Saturn rocket coming, the ring-shaped thing coming off the back of where the camera is, and kind of yawing as it goes vector? I don't even know what I always think of Koyaanisqatsi when I see Apollo footage.
No, this was the title sequence to MTV. They played it every 15 minutes of the Saturn rocket, going into space.
But I feel like by that time I had already seen it so many times on 321 Contact and in IMAX screens and
Big Blue Marble in space.
You remember? Have we ever talked about Big Blue Marble?
I don't think so.
We sing very much alike, enjoy spring very much alike. This was the precursor to really 321 Contact and a lot of those. It was kind of a National Geographic for Kids thing that PBS ran. They would kind of had It's a Small World view of, here's a kid in Monterey, but here's a kid in Kenya. Let's see what he's up to.
I loved it because, that Big Blue Marble started in the mid 70s where I was 7 years old. I was like, give me more of whatever this is. Big Blue Marble. It was like, 321 Contact, but also Zoom.
It was Zoom.
Zoom.
So we're the generation that was formed by that imagery of the Big Blue Marble.
Yeah, right.
The Earth from space. That was actually the name of an Apollo photograph, a NASA photograph from Apollo 17.
And you always heard astronauts saying, like, I never really felt like a human.
Well, we're going to talk about the origin of that. Oh. Because all that is surprisingly recent. And, as a kid, I feel like I was also drawing space wrong, even though I had the benefit of that. I remember drawing space, maybe as a result of growing up in a city.
How do you
where
draw
we had all the ambient
space?
light.
It's just you put little stars on a piece of notebook paper.
Here's what I was doing wrong that I got called on. I think it's because Crayola had a crayon called Midnight Blue. I was like, midnight. So I would use that for the night sky, and I would use it for space.
Blue.
And it wasn't until somebody had to point out to me, well, in space there's no
one can hear you scream,
and secondarily, no light scattering at all. Space is not, in fact, very dark blue. Space is black. And I was like, no, I go out at night. Space is dark blue.
Oh.
And, somebody had to scientifically explain to me what color space was.
Interesting.
And in fact, the oldest conversations about what space and astronomy looks like actually centers on that question of what color is space.
Having never drawn space or been inspired to draw space, it didn't occur to me that I would have thought of it as a color or.
Well, you would have done it wrong because you're not a 4-year-old.
Well, no, I would have. I guess I always thought space was black.
Yeah. I don't know why I would have got the idea, but in fact, that's one of the earliest conversations about, pre Big Blue Marble, pre those 60s photos. I noticed as a kid just looking at. I had seen enough probably pulp sci-fi and old monster movies and old Golden Age comic books to know that people drew the Earth wrong. That they would just draw it like a desk globe where you could see all the continents It was blue and brown or blue and green.
Oh.
There was no real weather. It didn't look like actual NASA imagery.
And the moon had a face, and sometimes a cannon shell would hit it in the eye.
Sometimes a cow would jump over it. We were very superstitious back then. But, anciently, the first thinking about what space would look like was people wondering why it's not really bright. This is today called Olbers paradox, after the German amateur astronomer of the 19th century. I think it's maybe Hans Olbers, who...
what does that mean, that it's not very bright? That it's like in the sun, and so it should be...
Here's the argument. This is what Olbers discovered Pallas and Vesta, the early asteroids, but he's best remembered today for this paradox, which he didn't even think of. You go back to the 16th century, and all the early Copernicans are wondering this. If there's, if our sun is just one of these many stars, and if the universe is infinite and infinitely old, and therefore there are stars out there that have just been beaming forever at us, why isn't every point that we can see a star? Space should be infinitely bright. Instead, it's infinitely dark.
Because the light would all converge and it would just make a white background.
Yeah, there's somewhere in the direction you're looking somewhere, there's going to be a star out there. Space is infinitely big.
Right.
So why do we not have, it's called the night sky paradox. Why isn't space bright? And this was like a question that troubled Thomas Digges, the first British astronomer to subscribe to the Copernican theory. Kepler wrote about this. Edmund Halley wrote about this. Nobody could figure out why space was dark or why the night sky was dark instead of bright. Edgar Allan Poe weighed in on this.
What did he say?
In the 1840s. Well, he thought there must be some interruption. Something is blocking all that starlight. Today, the answer is, I think, a little better understood. It's
what?
It's the sense that the assumptions were wrong. The universe is not infinitely large, and the universe is not infinitely old.
Wait a minute.
And what's more, we know that light travels at a speed now.
Right.
So if the universe is a few billion years old and it's expanding,
there aren't stars in every single place in the world or in the sky.
You look at a direction and there's a place no light has got to us yet from because it wasn't there then, or the part of the thing about the Big Bang Theory is we know that once it was all a very bright, infinitely tiny space, but as it spread out, it got less bright, and the light from that place, if it's there, hasn't got to us yet, or maybe there's no stars there yet because the universe is still growing and stars are still forming.
Interesting.
So this was an active...
So wait, if the universe was infinitely large and infinitely old, the sky would be
It might be
white?
infinitely bright all the time. Whoa. I think so.
Okay. All right.
And that's how we know it's not, because it isn't.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Okay. I'm just, you've blown my mind.
If you ever pop into a different universe and the sky is infinitely bright, you'll be like, hey, this is one of those BS steady state theory universes.
Well, that's funny because when I was little, I was taught that not little, but when I started to get into space, they did say it was infinitely large and infinitely old, didn't they?
Yeah, I think when I was a kid, it was still being taught as a controversy. The Big Bang Theory, the steady state theory.
Right.
And what because if the universe is growing, it's growing, in places that we are billions of years away from being able to observe because of the speed of light. Which
places
means
that apparently had no universe in them.
We're never going to know. Right now it's all still supposition. We have a system that makes sense and is internally consistent.
What if we're just an atom in the finger of a giant being?
Whoa.
I know.
So the first thinking about what space looks like is stuff about the color of space. But of course, people have always had a conception of what the Earth would be like, going back to, the mythological roots of different belief systems. We have this modern idea that
the Earth is flat.
Well, we do have a modern idea that the Earth is flat. But we also have this misconception, a broader misconception, that during the Dark Ages and the Middle Ages, people believed the Earth was flat.
Yes.
The people had forgotten the wisdom of the ancients and the classical period when...
No one had looked at an obelisk in the sun between here and Petra or whatever.
That's all it takes.
Yeah.
The shadow's going to be a slightly different length. But it was widely believed that people had forgotten that. And in fact, if you go back to medieval manuscripts, there is no time when anybody forgets and thinks that the Earth is flat.
What? Is that true?
It is. And it's not just, a few scientists. Pretty much it's widely agreed among learned people throughout the medieval period that the Earth is a sphere.
So this was just a metaphor for how dumb the Middle Ages were, but it's not based on anything?
I think it's kind of an accidental early modern creation, like in the 19th century, and it's probably largely American. In order to make Columbus look better, authors, in particular Washington Irving, would write about these myths of Columbus saying like, I'm not going to sail off the edge, Your Majesty.
Oh, wow.
I'm going to go all the way around to Asia.
Made him seem brave, but in fact, everybody knew that China was around the other way.
Everybody knew you could get to China. In fact, Columbus would have died. The Earth was bigger than a lot of the math at the time said. So Columbus would have died if there had not been a big intervening continent in the way.
Right.
He got lucky when he hit the Caribbean. So
we all do.
Hey, how Christopher got his groove back. He went to the Bahamas.
Well, that's also a new piece of information. I mean, it always seemed somewhat suspect. The Renaissance comes along and it's like, well, we forgot how to make realistic art, and then we rediscovered it. And look, now we can do all this stuff that there was.
Yeah, you could.
1,400 years where nobody could draw with perspective.
You could imagine a world where people forgot about the Earth being round. But in fact, they did not. Medieval manuscripts are full of the Earth drawn as a sphere. Often there will be, gravity is well enough understood that they show the 4 cardinal points by 4 people standing on the surface of this little Prince-like asteroid that has bumpy mountains and stuff to represent north, south, east, and west. The people are all standing on the surface and pointing outwards.
So what did Copernicus get persecuted for?
He thought he knew that the sun was in the middle.
Oh, that the sun wasn't revolving around the Earth.
Right.
Got you.
And at that point, a lot of the conversations among the smarties revolved around, well, are the stars just basically a stage backdrop at a uniform distance from the Earth, as it appears? Or are those all suns at different astronomical distances? They could all have their own solar systems.
Right.
But, the medieval manuscripts are full of very detailed pictures of the Earth as a sphere, including climatic zones. Right. It's cold up here. Here's the equator. There's a southern hemisphere where, people are walking around upside down. Like it was all, none of this ever went away.
Even before the Portuguese sailed around Africa.
Absolutely, yeah. And you'll see world maps then that are kind of, they don't look like what we would recognize as a world map because obviously the Americas and Australia and Antarctica are missing.
But the Mediterranean is pretty well done.
Yeah, the Mediterranean's all there. The earliest world maps are called TO maps now because it looks like a letter T inscribed in a letter O. So it's like a circle where there's a top half and then 2 bottom quarters. Imagine my plate.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So good. So there's half veg.
Except it's half Asia and then Asia's on top. Instead of north being at the top of these maps, it points east.
Asia's on top again.
See?
Yeah.
They're always
time is a flat circle.
This is why we use the word Orient to mean to put something right side up.
Oh,
because east, the Oriental side, used to be the top of a map.
Really?
Yeah.
That's why we use Orient.
That's why Orient means to situate yourself.
I haven't been a part of an omnibus episode that's given me more new information than this one in a long time.
You should be taking notes.
Wow.
This is good stuff.
I'll just listen back to this episode. I won't.
Have you ever listened to omnibus?
No.
What's the most omnibus you've ever heard?
Well, I hear it every week.
Yeah, it's you talking for an hour and a half.
But
I've listened back to maybe 20 seconds at a time to try to figure out what somebody was complaining about, or
I've definitely gotten into a car where omnibus was playing.
They must have been delighted to see you.
Well, and I
get in.
Yeah, hey,
we're listening to omnibus,
and I didn't immediately say, "Will you shut this off?" And so heard a little bit of badinage between us before I was like, "Will you shut this off?"
This is awful. Why does anybody listen to this? No, so Asia's on top in one of these TO maps, and then, if you could imagine that being east, that means the southwest corner or the lower left corner is Europe, and the lower right corner is Africa.
What were global maps made in China? How were they depicting the world at the time?
Global maps in China are pretty much of China.
Yeah.
I think they got. They got the idea of Eurasia as a landmass. So much as ours kind of fade out. You look at these early Mappa Mundi from Europe, and it's not too long. Like in the like as early as the year 1500, they've got a pretty good sense of what Eurasia and Africa look like.
Yeah.
And India and South Africa are a little bit kind of chunky and sketched in.
But Marco Polo had been.
Yeah, Marco Polo had been, and that had gone both ways.
Yeah.
So I think by that time, East Asian maps look pretty good,
I mean, the Chinese had to figure that those marauding horse people were coming from somewhere. They knew they were coming from there, somewhere.
Did you know about this new idea that Genghis Khan is good?
Oh.
Yeah, like I had totally been unaware of this. The last 10, 20 years in academia has been about, actually, the Mongol horde was pretty good.
Is this because more and more Mongolians are coming to New York City?
No, it's
from the University of Mongolia?
I think more and more people are doing 23andMe and finding out they have a little bit of Genghis Khan.
Oh, I see.
So we have to reclaim him.
So what is the deal? I mean,
they're not a lot more anti-democratic than anybody else at the time.
Right.
I think they get a bad break because they're nomadic horse people.
Yes.
So you don't leave big ruins. But if you actually look at them on a more relativistic axis, their civilization is as good at doing that as Rome was at being Rome, So
yeah, I mean, the Celts didn't leave very impressive ruins either.
But that's because Pete doesn't.
But they're the ones that probably denigrated the Huns as much as anybody, or the Mongols rather.
Anyway, I just learned this week that
that's cool.
Actually Genghis Khan is good. So
I'm going to look into
please
that.
adjust your stereotypes. So like the first surviving globe is a German Erdapfel, Earth apple.
Mm-hmm. Earth apple.
That's how Germans make words.
Mm-hmm. They sure do.
Like this computer, they call this a word window.
Yeah, electric book hatred.
Lightning word book window.
There must be a German word for computer is Computer.
Yeah, but
right?
that's unusual for them, right?
Yeah.
Like there's probably an older word. Their original word for electricity probably is spark system man.
Yeah.
Or something.
Well, there's only like 11 words in Danish, and they just combine them all in increasingly ridiculous orders.
They're like, it's not our fault. The Vikings were so dumb. But this first Earth apple is literally from 1492.
That's the year Columbus sailed the ocean blue.
That's the one thing I know about it. Columbus is not back yet. Whoa. So this has the continent stretching around on a sphere, but it's just Eurasia and Africa.
Do you think that after Columbus went out, it all across Europe, people were sitting in front of their televisions, waiting for him to get back?
Like the space landing? Can you imagine how mad that globe company was? Like, hey, we finally got a really good globe. And the next year, Columbus is like,
well, but how long?
He shows up like a madman. Your globes are all wrong. Keep watching the skies.
How long after he got back did he understand that he had not actually arrived in India?
Didn't he die not knowing?
Yeah, right. I mean, there must have been some Germans with slide rules going, or not slide rules, but with compasses going, wait a minute, this could not be India.
Columbus died in 1506. I think by then there were maps showing that the distances were right. But I think you're right. All his last expeditions were like, well, now I'm skipping the Indies and I'm heading to mainland India, and of course he's in Venezuela or something.
Right. Venezuela, the India of South America.
We're always saying that. He must have died not knowing, I think. But not long thereafter, we do get better. I guess those Ortelius maps where you can actually see, that's all 17th century. Yeah, Columbus is long gone, I think. By the time it starts, the coast is well enough explored that somebody's like, this isn't actually India. And of course you could have proven that very easily by just computing longitude and the size of the Earth.
Oh, could you?
Yeah, one could. Hold on. Let me just take a second and do it right now. Yep. America exists. But those are maps. World maps were pretty good. And increasingly they would add the Americas, then Australia, then Antarctica.
Still a lot of dragons on them up till recent times.
Right. And they're not intended as illustrations of what the Earth would look like from outside. They were navigational aids. The same way that when you're riding on the London subway and you look at an underground map, you're not thinking,
right,
this is what it would look like if I could see all those tunnels from above. You're just seeing, this is a schematic that will help me know when I switched to the circle line.
Was that just a thought technology that just didn't occur to anybody? Like, what would this look like if I were floating in space?
There is no evidence that anyone thought that until the 1830s. Let's introduce our pioneer here, Henry Thomas, not Henry Thomas from E.T., but Henry Thomas de la Beche. It actually would have been Beach, but he had an upwardly mobile father who decided he would like to connect himself with some Norman nobles of old that he was not related to.
Wasn't he the guy in Alabama that got prosecuted and failed for burying 3 guys in an earthen dam?
Is that true?
I don't know, De La Beche.
That sounds right.
Yeah.
Oh, no,
it's De La
Beckwith.
Beckwith.
That's
That's who he was.
That's the guy that killed the Freedom Riders guy.
Yeah.
Yes. This guy was a scientist, but he was not an astronomer. He got into science probably a very unusual way nowadays, but a pretty common way back then. He got into science via illustration.
Oh.
He loved drawing fossils. And after his dad's sugar plantation went belly up, I think his slave-owning dad dies in Jamaica. He and his mom get shipwrecked on the way home, but finally make it back to England. And they set up shop in West Dorset on the English coast.
Famous place for scientists.
Well, it works out for him because he and his mom lived near Mary Anning of a previous omnibus fame.
Early omnibus.
Yeah, she's a paleontologist, a lady paleontologist.
She's digging skeletons out of the cliff.
She's scaling the bluffs of what is now called the Jurassic Coast, discovering ichthyosaurs and plesiosaurs and pteranodons. She is a groundbreaking, she's the she sells seashells by the seashore lady.
And as we talked about then, at the time, being a scientist just meant you were rich and bored.
Yeah, and you had time to wander around nature
smart.
with a butterfly net, basically.
Right.
Although Mary Anning being a woman meant that she did not have a lot of the resources that her rich, she couldn't get in the Royal Society. She couldn't get funding for her ideas.
Genius polymath.
But she had an amazing fossil collection, and this 14-year-old kid next door just fell in love with fossils and had a knack for art, just like you were drawing, tomcats or strike eagles.
Good job.
Or whatever.
Nice list of
are those close?
airplanes.
I'm just remembering Top Gun. He would want to draw he would want to do elaborate drawings of what these skeletons would look like as animals. And in fact, the very first popular image of a bunch of dinosaurs hanging out was a Henry de la Beche joint.
Oh, because they finally somebody was like, let's put flesh on these guys.
Right.
And put them in a swamp.
And let's imagine them in a swamp.
Yeah.
So he takes his neighbor Mary Anning's ichthyosaurs and plesiosaurs and pteranodons, puts them all together. He even imagines, it's kind of a funny thing where one of the dinosaurs is so scared that it's pooping, and those are making the coprolites, the fossilized species that she had discovered.
Oh, so he wanted to include it all. Yeah. And did he put feathers on them?
No, this is pre-feathers, of course.
Scaly.
They just look like reptiles. But it's a massively successful thing, and he does it these lithographs to raise money for Mary Anning.
And did Mary Anning approve of these representations of her aminals?
Well, I think they were paying the rent on her cottage
dig it.
So she was all in favor of catching the public eye. So he grows up a big dinosaur guy. He goes on to become the first director of the Geological Survey of Great Britain, the first president of the Paleontographical Society. He was a caricaturist, always drawing his rival scientists being goofs. But he was into geology and engraving. And in his 1834 treatise about geology, he opens with an engraving of his own, an etching of his own devising called "The Earth Supposed to be Seen from Space."
Huh.
So not the Earth seen from space, clearly something that is impossible, but he's like imagining a fourth dimensional solid or something. The Earth's supposed to be seen from space.
Yeah. As if.
We all know that's impossible, but here's a fantasy where you could do it. And it looks it's floating in a kind of a black velvety background. He's a scientist, so he makes sure that he's got the orthographic, the
curvature.
Yeah, the curvature, the continents. He has Eurasia receding nicely as if it were projected onto a sphere. He has even made the Earth's poles a little bit flattened. It's oblate. at the time, that had recently been discovered, and everybody was abuzz with the idea that it must mean the Earth was once congealing magma, liquid in space, fluid.
That it's fatter around the
It's fatter on the middle because it was whirling when it was still fluid.
Right.
So he acknowledges that. But it looks pretty much like a desk globe, although he does have a few kind of wispy but translucent bands of cloud kind of going across the horse latitudes.
And does he draw two sides of it or just the one?
Just the one side. So you're floating above the Eurasian, the Eastern Hemisphere, we would now say. There's not really much detail. There's no mountains or anything, but he draws for some reason, he's very into Lake Chad and Lake Baikal, both of which are very oversized, whereas Lake Victoria, which had been discovered long ago and known to be larger, he left out. So he's not a map maker. He's coming at it from a geologist's perspective.
Did he get the Great Lakes in the United States?
He only has the Eastern Hemisphere.
Oh, I see.
So just like many Europeans then and now, he is ignoring America completely.
They'll be sorry.
They'll all pay. But this is the first time anybody has thought, hey, you could get outside the Earth and consider it as a... I wonder if people would look at their desk globes and they would fantasize about space travel, because early science fiction did exist, people going to the sun and moon and whatnot.
Huh. Well, they must have.
A child must have looked at a globe and thought, I could be flying above this. Whee!
But I don't know. Yeah, how interesting. I mean, so many thought technologies are just like one day somebody goes, hey.
You could go into space and see from it.
And everybody goes, whoa, and it's a whole new universe, literally.
Yeah, it's tempting to think that, they all just thought like us, and of course they could project themselves to being up in the sky, but it's a world without space.
Yeah.
Their idea of space is like Dante zipping up into the heavens and seeing, the righteous souls on arcing across the sky like Saturn and Jupiter. They don't really have a sense of space as a three-dimensional vacuum,
Yeah, if you think about matter, the idea that matter is made of parts was also an idea that arrived one day. Like, it's not just that we're made of things. Like,
there's stuff in us.
Yeah, bits.
Little bits. It's actually unpleasant to think about.
Really small. We're just made of small bits.
I prefer to not think about that.
Or as everybody says, we're mostly space and water.
Oh,
we're mostly space.
We're all from supernovas, man.
Yeah.
Any element heavier than nitrogen formed in a supernova.
Yeah, we're all bits.
We're all star stuff, man.
Star childs.
But this is the illustration that appears to kick off a century of people wanting to imagine the Earth from space. The most common 19th century view is to imagine the Earth as seen from the moon. I guess that's something you could start to, once you have science fiction where Jules Verne is sending people to the moon, then it becomes natural to think, oh, you would look back.
You'd be able to see the Earth.
The Earth would be floating there.
Yeah.
And they all make the mistake that I think we do today of making the Earth a little bit too big.
Bigger than the moon.
Well, yeah, I mean, it is 4 times bigger than the moon because it's 4 times bigger than the moon or whatever. But the moon is smaller than you think. I
know how small the moon is.
If you extend, we've done a whole show on how small the moon is and how big moose are.
That's right. I know both things.
If you extend a U.S. coin at arm's length, you know what will cover the moon?
You've showed me this.
It's a dime. It's so much smaller than you think.
This was part of your moon entry that I really disbelieved.
That you disliked.
Yeah, that the moon at the horizon is optically not any different than the moon at...
Well, in movies, they'll use a zoom lens or even special effects to make the moon seem big the way it would in art. Whereas if you take a photo of the moon, it always just sucks.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, that star is a little bigger than the others. Oh, that's the moon.
That moon does suck. Sucky moon,
but we all hate the moon.
Blow up the moon!
But, that means if you're on the moon, a dime won't cover up the Earth, but a $50 probably will do the trick.
Maybe the $50, the Eisenhower $50 that has the moon on the back.
Whoa.
Oh, the moon covers the Earth. Boom.
I never liked that giant eagle on the moon.
Well, what the hell was the eagle even doing?
I know, it can't breathe.
USA.
What U.S. coin is 4 times the size of a dime?
It
seems like it would be a $50 or an Eisenhower dollar.
I don't think you could put 4 dimes in a $50, but a full Eisenhower dollar would be 5 dimes.
So basically, if you're on the moon, you're holding out a silver dollar at arm's length, and that's covering the moon. So it's not
that's covering the Earth.
They're covering the Earth. Yeah, you can't cover the moon. You need a very big tarp if you're on the moon to cover the moon. So all these, a lot of these were magic lantern slides. You know how in the days before movies, kids would have a toy that was basically a slide projector, but worse?
You're talking about me now.
Did you have a... I had a Viewmaster.
Yeah, I guess a Viewmaster.
But this is not a handheld one. This is like a little Victorian boy in an Ingmar Bergman movie aiming in at the wall of his nursery.
Oh, no, I didn't have that.
And a lot of times they're... Yeah, because you're not 150 years old. That's why you didn't have it.
As far as you know.
And they're hand tinted and they often have fanciful scenes. Sometimes they're a little bit interactive, like, you know, you make the fire burn by adding a red tint, or maybe there's a silhouetted figure that can walk across it. It's goofy, but they didn't have movies. So they didn't have MTV, John.
You hang a horse rustler.
That's right.
Yeah. You
can make him sway back and forth. So like a very popular one of these showed the Earth above a craggy, canyoned moon. And that one was in color. Like it's blue, so people are, we're getting close to the big blue marble is not a marble yet, but it is blue and it's too big. It needs to shrink. There's an 1881 by Camille Flammarion, a French astronomer, that imagines the Earth above a craggy lunar landscape, but this time it has a little atmosphere. He has the idea that there's this early astronaut overview effect idea that there's
a sleeve,
a fragile sleeve that's keeping life going. In fact, you cannot see that from anything like lunar orbit
because it's small.
Because it's so thin. So that's exaggerated. But the scientist is trying to show from a geological perspective, here's what the biosphere would look like.
That must have been a crazy realization to say like, oh, right, we're in a bag.
There doesn't seem to be any record of anybody getting that astronaut effect just from illustration or thought exercise. Like we have to send a bunch of Air Force doofuses to space.
Most of them were Navy doofuses. Yes.
Okay, we have to spend a bunch, even worse.
I know.
We have to send a bunch of Navy guys to space for them to be like, oh, did you ever stop to think? Because there are a bunch of these images. In 1892, Max Wilhelm Meyer has a picture from Earth where he's imagining an eclipse from the moon, like the sun covers the Earth.
Boing.
Or sorry,
the Earth covers the sun.
Yeah, that would be weird. You'd be dead if the sun
can't
covered
see
the
Earth. It's between me and the moon.
And of course, the Earth being so big, you don't have the nice corona like we get in a total eclipse on Earth.
Oh, right.
But the first illustration of, can you imagine if you were on the moon? And this is clearly Stanley Kubrick in embryo. It was commonly used in newspaper cartoons of the time to the degree that it was almost a trope, like two hermits with beards on a desert island with a palm tree. Like they would show a bunch of aliens on a craggy Martian or lunar landscape, and they'd be saying something like, well, it looks like, they've got a telescope and they're like, it looks like Charles Evans Hughes is now governor of New York State. Or, they'd just have some comment on current events.
Right, I see.
And it would be like an op-ed cartoon.
What was the first depiction of an alien?
They all look like,
Moon men?
Yeah, they're like children's books ideas, that's kind of Dr. Seuss or Marvin the Martian.
I'm going to destroy the Earth.
They're extremely humanoid. It's almost the Star Trek thing where they're extremely humanoid, but they're orange, or they have a third eye.
Right, a three-eyed, one-eyed longhorn flying purple people eater.
Except they're not, for the joke to work, they kind of have to read as aliens, but also have human expressions. So they're not that different than the German expressionist film you were talking about with the exotic kind of orientalized princesses on the moon or whatever they have up there. In 1937, a French artist named Lucien Rudeau starts to produce these really lush oil paintings of the solar system, basically. And this guy's really important and kind of forgotten today, but this is a missing link between, 18th century engraving and what would become science fiction film, wanting to have this immersive, because he really does produce for the first time, to us, having been raised on Voyager and Pioneer and Mariner imagery, it's boring to see somebody doing an oil painting of the rings of Jupiter the rings of Saturn or the Great Red Spot or moons of Jupiter or the surface of Mars. But to people who had no ability to see photographs of this, that was the game changer when you could see these beautiful paintings of gas giants and other worlds. And, this is what leads right into the 20th century and space movies, but still nobody has got a photograph of Earth from space. People are still imagining what it would look like, and they're all wrong. The clouds aren't right. There's kind of outlines on the continents. It's basically like the Rand McNally atlas on a tennis ball.
I just looked into this. As early as 200 AD, the earliest surviving speculation that there was life on the moon, 200 AD in Byzantium, Lucian of Samosata
took some hashish.
Yeah, wrote a satire where there were all kinds of like humanoid people and animals and lots of people living on the moon.
Yeah, if I remember right, a lot of these early, what now reads to us as science fiction was just satire about earthly government and foibles, but like you could make it safe by being like, well, on the sun,
right? Because
you don't want to say
the emir,
king, whatever. Yeah, exactly. So I guess it's kind of a natural thing to look up at the moon and think,
well, who lives there?
Yeah, there's people here. There could be people there. But there was, but until the 19th century, no detail, no sense that like, boy, these could be a canyon just like the ones on Earth. And so the photographic age of space begins before Sputnik. On October 24th, 1946, the U.S. Army launches from White Sands, New Mexico, basically its own kind of souped-up V-2 rocket.
Right.
From a mix of German spare parts and new General Electric replacement parts, they've gussied up their own V2, and I'm sure there's some Operation Paperclip guys on the ground who are like, this is how we do it.
Yeah, basically.
They shoot it into the air, and it gets to 65 miles up, which is beyond what today we call the Kármán line, the international convention for where space begins.
Had a V2 ever gone that high before?
No.
That was a record.
That was a record. A V2 had gone up to like 40-something miles a few years before, and that's high enough that you can see the spherical horizon. At that point, you can see the curvature of the Earth.
Right.
And I believe it took photos.
We generally, in jumbo jets, fly at 30 or 35,000 feet, but sometimes they go up to 40, don't they?
Yeah, but this is not 40,000 feet. Like this is like 40 miles. Like we're going 5 or 6 miles up in planes.
Right.
Like these rocket tests are literally, an order of magnitude
Yeager
greater.
Altitude.
Yeah, higher, in fact. So, and they put a 35 millimeter movie camera in the back and, in hopes that they would get some imagery, I guess. And one frame of that is a really a striking composition where, if you can imagine a square frame kind of divided diagonally into two triangles, the upper left is nothing but the velvet, icy blackness of space. And the lower right, because they're only 60 miles up, so it's almost not curved at all. It's almost a straight line, is the Earth above, presumably, New Mexico. But there's weather. Like, for the first time, we can see clouds from above, and it's a game changer because you can actually see, this is familiar to us, the kind of those spiral cyclonic patterns. We're used to the views of the Earth where the attention-grabbing thing is this frosting-like swirl of white, more so than the contrast between land and sea. And that had never occurred to anybody. All these other ones were just land and sea, and occasionally they would be like, yeah, and there'll probably be some wispy, a few wispy, and they would literally draw in like 5 wisps of cloud over all the Earth.
Right.
The idea that every little part of the Earth would have its own weather system going on,
right,
and that would be busier than any of the geology you could see had not really occurred to anybody.
Busy. The Earth is busy.
Well, the weather's busy.
Yeah.
And it's big. You can see clouds and tropical storms in a way that you can't see cities and rivers and mountains and people. So, who goes nuts when they see this picture is meteorologists.
Oh, sure they do.
Because suddenly they're like,
already nuts.
They're already crazy for weather. And they're like, wait, we could put satellites when Sputnik happens, we could put satellites in space and then we could see pictures of the weather before it happens. Like, at this point, meteorologists are the only people aware that this is a big deal.
My sister is an amateur meteorologist, much like...
What does that mean? She's like, hey, it's cold.
Much like the scientists of 19th century Britain are discovering dinosaurs. My sister and my mom, they've decided now to every morning wake me up with a group text about the weather and all of the information about because, meteorologists are like, 10 days from now, it's going to snow for 5 days. And 8 days later, they're like, it's actually going to snow for 2 hours. And then the day of, it doesn't snow. And they're like, well, next time. And so my sister and my mom are in on this game.
Is this mostly a winter thing? Because that's a big Seattle pastime, going and buying out all the bananas at QFC when there's snow in the
storm
forecast.
comes. No, they do it all year. And now that my sister lives on Whidbey Island and my mom lives in Burien.
Oh, they can compare.
Oh, and they're just like, well, today, up here it's 2 degrees warmer and there's not a cloud in the sky. So I'm just like, come on. But they do it like 8 a.m. and my phone goes bzz, bzz, and I go, yeah, I know the temperature today and the clouds.
This is my parents as well, absolutely.
Is it really?
Well, yeah, because they're in Squim and they're like, well, it's
the rain cloud.
We're in the rain shadow. It's
Herp-a-derp.
it's sunny out here.
Yeah.
And I remember my grandpa as a kid being like, well, we're in a convergence zone here on the Snohomish County line. So our weather is very different from, say, Ballard.
Yeah, Ballard.
These older folks who watch the weather, they love microclimates because there's more going on.
Yeah.
Like across town, maybe it's hailing. It's not hailing here.
No, that's astonishing. Let's send up a satellite.
I'll alert the media. But meteorologists are the first ones to be like, this will change our field, like for the better. Because I think, and they're thinking, well, think how accurate predictions could be if you could actually see what the clouds were doing at that scale. This had not occurred to anybody. And in fact, the first weather satellites do go up like very soon after Sputnik, 1959, 1960. The U.S. has satellites up there just to keep an eye on the weather. But even before Sputnik, like in the mid-50s, Life magazine, there's enough rocket tests that the military can start putting together mosaics of different photos.
Right.
Which means, Life magazine can show you, hey, here's a whole slice of the surface of the earth with all the clouds and weather activity going on. And people go bonkers for this. But interestingly, one exception is NASA. NASA is not interested at all in the visual side.
Why? They don't have publicity in their minds.
They haven't realized that it's a publicity tool.
Right.
They're just interested in, can we get a guy in a can up, and if we get him back down, does he die?
Right. Does he have? Is he irradiated to the point?
That's right. Does he have superpowers? And they are not. And in fact, when the astronauts are tempted to take pictures, because John Glenn or Alan Shepard are like describing what they're seeing, and because they're launching from Florida, it's generally, there's clear skies and cool weather, and you can see the shape of the state.
Yes.
Which would not be true if they were launching from Wyoming.
Right.
So they're all like, wow, it just looks like Florida on a map, and everybody wants to take photos, and NASA has to say they have to ban tourist photographs, what they call them.
Really?
Astronauts will not take tourist photographs. And luckily, John Glenn did not listen. He and his wife had been to Cocoa Beach, whenever, the day before their quarantine started a week ago, and he bought a cheap little Japanese camera from a souvenir stand, and he snuck it aboard, and all the pictures were terrible. Like, he didn't get anything good, I guess.
Yeah.
The light and the spinning and the motion, he didn't get anything good, but it made him a hero later when he did his world tour and he went through Tokyo.
Because he had taken a Nikon camera.
And they're throwing a parade, and they found out he had taken a Leica or whatever, some Japanese brand of camera.
Leica is a German.
Oh, that's right, not Leica. So he was a hero in Japan because he had brought a Japanise camera.
Good man.
Aboard his little capsule. But, NASA tries to get geologists interested. They're like, hey, like we're starting to think about imagery. You can see the space, you can see the Earth from above.
Yeah.
Don't you think, you're going to see interesting stuff? And geologists are like, no, we're good.
Except a million dorm rooms in 1972 will have.
They don't know that yet.
I see.
And plus all the stuff now where, you can literally go on Google Earth and discover Mayan ruins or unexplored rainforests.
Have you looked at these LiDAR images?
No, what is of what?
There's now from space, you can look at scans. It's called light detection and ranging.
Yeah, I know how LiDAR is used for like agriculture. Oh, wow.
Yeah. So see, now they're finding all these middens and all these, like burial sites and crazy stuff that still has echoes in the ground that you would have no visible indication it was there. And it's like this boon. There's all kinds of websites now of real kooks like Quooks where Quora and Reddit are not kooky enough for them, where they're out there like, well, this is clearly evidence of, and I think, yeah, there's a lot when you're driving in Europe and you passed a little stand of trees, there's just as much chance that there's a Norman burial ground as there is that it's just a place the farmers didn't
like
plow.
50-50?
Yeah.
The geologists are like, no, I think we're on Earth.
Oh.
We can see stuff just fine. We don't need you in space to. So they're not interested. But luckily, an Army Corps of Engineers guy named Richard Underwood is asked to form a photographic advisory group. And you have to think there's some possibly espionage angle here. You know, there's some intelligence angle too.
Well, his name is Underwood, not Under Rock.
That's a fair point.
Thanks. I mean, I wish you had a bell.
I don't know if that rises to the level of a bell.
One opportunity I get in a year for somebody to be like,
I have
gross.
a 3-hole punch here. Does that make noise?
That's what I get. Huh?
Is that the sound of
That's what I deserve.
like a non-pun?
Click clack.
Confusing thing. And so, because they must have known, like, one of the reasons why you put satellites, and I'm sure this is why it's getting funded, for military reasons,
for
right?
sure. You got to tell what the Russians are up to.
Yeah, so you have to know that there's photographic benefit to that.
This is what year?
This is like around 1960.
Oh, so just right in the Cuban Missile Crisis zone.
Yeah, exactly. Cuban Missile Crisis has just happened. What's John Glenn, 61, 62?
Yeah.
So it's right around the same time. Richard Underwood is in the early 60s, put in charge of this photographic advisory group, and he thinks this should be a priority, that we should not launch something that doesn't take pictures, and in fact, pictures of us. So like on November 10th, 1967, we launched the ATS-3 satellite. When I say we, I mean humankind.
This is right when the German scientists were like, we don't need windows in our spacecraft.
Yeah, exactly.
I've seen the right stuff.
All that stuff is true, and if that had happened, John Glenn would not have bought that camera in Cocoa Beach because
he would not be famous in Japan.
Because he would not be famous in Japan at all. In fact, maybe they would hate him.
And probably Cheap Trick would never get invited to Japan.
Do you think that's why they invited Cheap Trick?
I think so.
They're like, we here at Budokan just love the space race.
John Glenn took a cheap camera to space. Now America's giving us a cheap trick.
So the ATS-3 satellite finally gets far, because these are just little, these satellites are in low enough orbit that you're not getting Earth. You're getting
apart.
You're getting, Bermuda or something, with clouds above it. You're getting
Bermuda.
You're getting part of Panama or something. You're getting part of Virginia. But the ATS-3 gets far enough away that it can take a full picture of the full disk of Earth in color.
The whole disk?
Yeah. And a year later, that picture appears on the first issue of the Whole Earth catalog. So
the hippies got it.
The hippies got it within a year.
That's why this poster was on all the dorm room walls.
And that's what was happening. Like NASA realized that people were fascinated by this image of something they'd been on the whole time but had never seen.
Yeah.
Apollo 8 is the one that goes around the moon in 10 times, with Borman and Lovell on it. And those guys all had cameras, and they took the famous, on Christmas Eve, in fact, they take the famous picture of Earth floating above the lunar horizon, which NASA calls Earthrise, and everybody on Earth goes nuts for that photo.
So you know my story of that. Have I told you this? I surely have told you this story.
Maybe in the Moon Horizon one? What's
decades ago? It must have been in the Moon Horizon ones. Yeah, I was at Boeing Surplus back when it used to be in Renton, walking around looking for filing cabinets and whatever else you find at Boeing Surplus, missile targeting systems and so forth.
On sale.
And leaning up against a wall was this framed photograph of Earthrise in a mid-century wooden frame with glass, and it was 3.5 feet tall by 18 inches.
Wow.
Or 3.5 feet long, 18 inches tall. And I picked it up, and it weighed 50 pounds. Turned it over, and there was a man's name written in pencil, in cursive, against the back. And I took it up to the cash register and was like, well, what is this? I mean, can I have it? And they were like, $5. And so I put it on my wall, and it's, it takes up a whole wall. It's a massive thing. I just thought it was cool. And it's, it's not exactly beautiful because it's made up of strips of a scanner kind of thing. Yeah. It was printed out on a scanner. And then one day I had somebody over at the house and they were like, "Oh my God, you have one of the moonrises." And I said, "What do you mean one of the moonrises?" And they were like, "Well, when that first happened in 1966, they printed out some number of them in different sizes and gave them to all the people that were involved in the program. They gave them to NASA people, they gave them to Boeing people and McDonnell Douglas and Hughes Aircraft, or whoever." Mm-hmm. And so I looked up this guy whose name was on the back, and he was some scientist from Bell Laboratories who was, there were a couple of articles about him, and he's a sort of famous character.
And this was his office poster souvenir.
Sat on his office. I'm sure when he died, they cleared out his office, and this went to Boeing surplus. And it turns out that they made them in 3 different sizes or something for the office walls, and this is, I guess, the medium size. There's one that was 10 feet long or whatever. And there's a whole secondary market of super nerds who
want the engineers' copies of these posters.
Yeah, who want one. It's a huge and very cool, like clearly very cool thing.
And you still have it up, or?
Yeah, well, as soon as I realized that this was, this is what I go to thrift stores for, to find something that other nerds covet, and then to have it for myself and not...
You got there first.
Yeah, not let them see it. That's like the whole thing. So anyway...
And you didn't pay a fair market value. That's a very important part of the thrifting process.
That's exactly right. So I have it, and when I die, somebody will send it to a thrift store because I won't have put any sticker on it that's like, "Dear daughter, you can sell this to some neckbeard somewhere."
I've seen that picture so many times, and I think it's never occurred to me it's not being taken from the lunar surface.
Right.
It's being taken from the orbiting. Yeah, from the orbiter.
Yeah.
But everybody went nuts. We have to go back to 1950. This is amazing. I think the British astronomer Fred Hoyle, who is actually responsible for the steady state theory, the discredited steady state theory we mentioned earlier, he pointed out in 1950, I assume having seen some of these imagery from these V2 tests, he said, "Once a photograph of the Earth taken from outside is available, once the sheer isolation of the Earth becomes known, a new idea as powerful as any in history will be let loose."
Oh, wow.
So he predicted that this poster would exist and that would blow people's minds. And that's exactly what happened in Christmas Eve, 1968. The next day in the New York Times, Archibald MacLeish, who I think is the poet laureate at the time, writes, "To see the Earth as it truly is, small and blue and beautiful in that eternal silence where it floats, is to see ourselves as riders on the Earth together."
Yeah.
So it's not just ecological fragility, it's the common purpose and unity of man, of humankind.
Riders on the Earth.
And 1968, it's the same year that 2001 comes out, with that image of the Earth and the sun aligned over the lunar surface.
So wait, Kubrick did that in advance of the Big Blue Marble picture?
I think the Big Blue Marble picture is coming later in Apollo 17. The Whole Earth catalog, the early one, Kubrick would have seen. But I think this is from Christmas Eve 68, which means 2001 is already, the effects were done months ago.
Wow.
I think it came out at the end of 68.
He truly is the great auteur.
But he predicted it. And Fred Hoyle predicted it too, that this would be a game-changing
And did it do that? I don't remember 68 as being a time when everybody was like, let's just...
Immediately world peace happened in
put
1968.
down our guns.
Nobody assassinated anybody. Nobody carpet bombed anybody. But it was the youth movement, taking over, as you point out, dorm rooms and space imagery.
Having bed-ins.
Apollo 17 was the Big Blue Marble photo, which is even more beautiful. They got it from on their way to the moon, and the sun's directly above them, so the whole thing's equally lit, which is not true of the Earthrise photo, which means you got this incredible clarity. You can see the polar ice cap gleaming. It was weirdly also taken on Christmas Eve. You have to wonder why all these amazing... And they were... A lot of these Christmas launches were accompanied by kind of...
Yeah.
Some of the astronauts would read from the Bible in space or something.
Just like Linus in a Christmas special. Do you think that Jesus plays a role? Do you think Jesus is behind this?
Here's my conspiracy theory.
Yeah.
The Pope tells JFK to do the Apollo program in order to, galvanize a shrinking Catholic audience.
A young George Soros tells the Pope to tell JFK.
We go to the moon to read from Ecclesiastes in space, and then some of Job and Psalms if time allows. So that Apollo 17 photo is the one that was in the Big Blue Marble credits, and that's the one that became kind of a symbol of the environmental movement.
Oh, it did.
Like here's the fragile Earth. It's so beautiful, but clearly, the fact that it's surrounded by lifeless blackness kind of emphasizes its uniqueness and its fragility and the need to protect it.
Well, when you think about it, it's such a beautiful image, but how much of its specialness do you think is that it scares the living pants off of us? How much it's just death and darkness everywhere else?
Well, that's an interesting thing. The psychological effect of seeing the Earth on astronauts was studied. I mean, in between we have the Voyager probes where, like in 1977, we get our first image of the Earth with the moon. And then in 1990, famously, it leaves the solar system and it takes a picture on the way out where Earth is just one pixel.
Yeah.
And NASA is like, this is a pale blue dot. This is all we have. It's so vast, jump off a bridge. But in the 1980s, a lot of these Apollo retrospectives started to interview enough astronauts that people realized that a lot of them had something to say about that experience of seeing the Earth for the first time.
Oh.
So it's not until the 80s that people write about what we now call the overview effect, this new sense of awe, some kind of transcendental realization that happens when a human being sees the Earth from space.
Is it true that astronauts who have been to space are like all some kind of trippers now that are just like, whoa, I used to be a Navy pilot and all hung up, man. I was real tight, but now I'm just so
indica.
Chill. Yeah.
I kind of wonder. I mean, the people who go, obviously the demographic that goes into space controls against that.
Yeah, sure.
Because you had to have a crew cut for a long time to fit in the helmet. No,
but yeah, so they're all one kind of kook, but do you think...
No, but yeah, they will all say this in interviews. And I think now the idea is widespread enough that people who go into space are aware of the phenomenon, and now it's mediated by, okay, I'm going to have that thing that people talk about.
Yeah, right.
And interestingly, it manifests in different ways. Like when Bezos took William Shatner into space a couple years ago.
The most ridiculous sentence in the English language.
No, I thought he was going to. I think he planned to leave him there. I think. No. Yeah, no. He went into space with William Shatner. This actually happened.
Was this just to test like what happens to a hairpiece in space?
It's floating above his head. And Shatner was he described it as like, as you say, just not just terrifying but heartbreaking. Like I was in grief for the Earth. It was so beautiful, but I knew what had been done and what was being done to Mother Earth.
Wait, how does Shatner know all this? Does he know something we don't?
Yeah, he's on the Trilateral Commission.
Yeah, of course.
Everybody tells, hey, just so you know, we strip mined another mountain in Kazakhstan.
Yeah, the lizard people under the poles.
And he's like, no. Yeah, we just clear cut some more Amazon. Oh, Khan! But some people an interesting thing about the overview effect is some people who go into space, this is a space tourist.
Actually want to kill the Earth.
Yeah, they're like, beautiful. Now I can blow it all up. I'm just going to drop some rebar from up here. No, they describe it as a hopeful feeling. Like they have an idea, not just that it's so beautiful, but that it seems so small. You kind of have the sense of, well, all these problems must be manageable. Right. It simplifies the problem from up there. Like, if only everybody could see this, we would get everything settled because everything would become so clear. And so there's a sense of optimism that comes from the overview effect for some people, unless you're a deeply broken man like William Shatner.
This is true when you fly in an airplane over the West in particular, like the Northwest and Alaska, and where you're just like, well, there's miles and miles and miles and miles of nothing and nobody there, and it all is just being its natural self.
This was actually written about in the 50s before astronauts. People noticed some of the psychological effects of high flight.
Jet travel.
Yeah, like jet travel and probably fighter pilots before jet travel. They were the first ones who had I can't remember what it's called, but some kind of disconnect, like you're above the problem.
Yeah, exactly.
And you're still human, but not quite. And
even in the Midwest where you see like so much cropland, you also see how much isn't, and you also see what happens if somebody neglects it for even a year.
Right.
It's like, oh, this is not actually that bad. This will all be, genetically modified sunflowers, but it will be sunflowers again.
And we'll all be dead from the super virus or the nanotech or whatever, but it will very quickly be beautiful again.
Yeah, there will be Wolverines all over this.
Good news. The overview effect gets often compared to an even older idea, this 19th century British conception that I think started with the Romantics, maybe the German Romantics filtered into British Romantic poetry, of the sublime, which they associated with mountaintops.
Yeah, right.
Like they realized, if I climb a mountain, I get poetic insight that I do not get in the rest of the lake country.
Exactly. Goethe was up there in the Rennsteig going like, it's so clean.
There was literal Sturm and literal Drang.
Right.
And so the overview effect is often compared to that. It's the sublime effect of a mountain, except now you're not seeing a single valley. You're seeing the whole place where 8 billion people live. And
8 billion now.
And everything that implies.
Then it was only 6 billion.
Yeah, and if Shatner's right, soon it'll be 6 billion again.
Right.
We're on the downward slope apparently. But at least we get the clouds right now.
Yeah, that's right. We can draw the clouds.
The clouds look like frosting.
And the Mormons are having 7 kids, so we might be able to keep up the pace, keep that 8 billion number.
The future is Catholic and Mormon.
That concludes The Earth from Space. Entry 391.GN0115. Certificate number 35817 in the omnibus. Futurelings, you cannot see social media from space. And
too small.
Yeah, if you could, and that should give us hope. It seems like social media is enormous because every time you go there, it appears to encompass the entire world. If the world is young people who treat their dogs like kids, and in my case, skateboard accidents and people carving big turns on mountainsides where an avalanche is right on their heels.
It's like the Earth in that it seems to be reproducing very fast.
Do you feel when you go on social media that the algorithm is targeting you with specific Ken Jennings things? What are your things that the computers think you like?
I stay away from Instagram.
Yeah.
So I don't really see, I see my friends post, but I don't really see like, hey, Ken, you know what you're going to want on Instagram? Old maps.
Oh, you don't go there and chill.
Yeah. I'm not like, Instagram, take me away.
But you do go to Instagram to see me talking you on Instagram all the time?
Well, I would say mostly my nieces and nephews.
Yeah.
Cute pictures of them.
Yeah.
But I do have to scroll past you talking me.
Yeah, right. And posting pictures of old shoes that I found. Hey, look at these old shoes.
Woo!
700 comments. Cool shoes.
But the problem is the algorithm probably thinks now I want more old shoes because
That's what it is.
Because you're in my feed. You're part of the problem.
Well, it's good. It's good to hear that you are no longer going to the artist formerly known as Twitter, because the edgelord X makes you feel dumb to go there. Also holds no appeal. And let me encourage everyone that's still there to not go there. But also just get off it. You know what? Just get off it. Get a flip phone. Steal your life back. I wish I could take my own advice. My daughter wants a phone. And she's almost 13, and I can't
believe you got away with it.
We have kept it out of her hands. And she's like, listen, just get me a flip phone. All I want is just the ability to, and I'm like, the ability to what? She's like, I don't know, call people and text and stuff. And I'm like, text, eh? She's like, yeah. And so at Christmas, I said, all right, at your 13th birthday, what you will get is the right to buy your own phone. And she said, but I don't, what are you talking about? I don't want to have to. And I was like, exactly. You've never really had a reason to earn money because, her mother loves to buy her stuff. And so every time I'm like, we're going to teach you about money. She's like, uh-huh.
Yeah.
And then
kids don't want to hear that.
Yeah. She and her mom.
Which is realistic. They don't have any money. They don't want to be reminded of that.
By the time I was 8 years old, I was obsessed with money because we didn't have any money. Yeah. So every time somebody gave me $2, I was like, $2?
Tooth Fairy used to bring a quarter.
Yeah, a quarter. Jeez. So saving up $2 was. I remember when I had.
You can't even cover the earth with that.
Yeah. What the? No. The first time I had $100 in my bank book which had entries written in pen by the teller at the bank, I had $100, and I basically felt like you couldn't be richer. And it, that was $1976, so it's probably worth $1 million.
You were rich.
But yeah, so anyway, 13 years old, and I'm giving her the right to get a phone. But the rest of you, I would take, including myself, I would take your phones away. But if you do want to see what we say on the internet, you can go to @OmnibusProject. You can go to @Ken Jennings. You can go to @John Roderick. Put those in the internet and see what you get. Put that in the series of tubes that makes up the internet and see what @Ken Jennings
see what comes back. See what comes back on the little pneumatic tubes.
You can email us, which is a nice thing. We like to get emails. Email us at theomnibusproject@gmail.com. You can hang out with other people that also are not getting off of social media by putting future links into your browser. Ken likes to use Bing.
I'm always using Bing. I even use it as a verb. Hey, let me just Bing that.
I'll just Bing that. Actually, if you put @Ken Jennings into the search bar, you get your X profile. That's the first thing, because the @ still suggests tweets.
Doesn't Instagram have the @ No?
They do. But wait a minute. Your website is www.ken-jennings.com?
We've talked about this.
I know. It's really pretty lame.
I missed the chance to reclaim it. I think there was a brief moment where I could have bought the one without the hyphen, and I didn't.
There's an Instagram account called Ken Jennings the Goat @the Trivia Legend. Do you know who that is?
@the Trivia Legend?
Yeah, the @ is @the Trivia Legend.
That's the domain? I'm going to go to thetrivialegend.com right now and see what's there.
It's basically pictures of you looking kind of rad. Like it's got
like AI generated?
Well, no, it's got you wearing a pink V-neck sweater. It's got you sitting on the stage at some kind of tech conference. It's got you in your Jay Leno Hawaiian shirt. It's got you throwing out the first pitch. This place,
pink sweater.
This
has it all.
It has 7,600 followers too. This is a major account.
What is it? It's an Instagram account?
Yeah, Ken Jennings fan account.
Well, people probably think it's me.
Well, maybe. Oh no, I think they know it's a. I think they know that it's a somebody that's getting your
weirdo.
Yeah, because the comments are all weirdos.
Hey, I just following a similar rabbit hole when you were mentioning that, I found this review of the Jeopardy Goat Tournament, and I have to read it. By respect and memory of Alex, please do not allow the ad for Tampax with this woman with a deep cleavage during the show. Thank you for your help. Sincerely, Heidi.
Sincerely, Heidi, a 79-year-old woman.
No, it's got to be older than that. Heidi's no longer with us.
This cleavage is too much.
Please do not allow the ad for Tampax with this woman with a deep cleavage. Good. That's a good note on Jeopardy Go. That's what I took away from it.
Well, it's from the age where a tampon was like a crime against nature. Oh my God!
I can't believe they said the word tampon during Jeopardy.
You can send us mail at P.O. Box 55744, Shoreline, Washington 98155. Ken, I noticed during the episode we recorded last, the one that was mine, that you weren't over there opening mail through the second half of the episode.
Yeah, you like that.
Oh,
you usually love that when I'm opening mail.
When
you're like, oh boy,
half looking at me and
what could this be?
Ripping open boxes. There's a whole segment of our audience that counts the number of times my chair squeaks, but nobody that counts the number of times that you're opening envelopes.
Well, maybe if I just bitch more about your squeaky chair. I didn't go to the post office this week.
Oh, okay.
It's probably full of Christmas gifts.
Oh yeah,
for
Christmas
us.
Cards. Yeah,
for us, but no.
And let me encourage you, if you love the Omnibus, if you love our sterling content, if you
never a Tampax ad to offend the ear.
If you want to come over here and have it replace your social media life, the hole in your life that's shaped like social media, give to the patreon.com/omnibusproject. That will give you access to over 50 additional podcasts that we've done.
Oh yeah, the 50 addenda shows.
Yeah, for the Patreon subscribers, and also lots of other content, pictures and puns, a couple of videos of Ken and me at a salsa dance class. That's not actually on there, but
We should have that. I mean, we could just have AI generated, I guess.
Yeah, why don't we make funny videos of each other? Because we never do anything funny. We could just make videos of ourselves at French restaurants.
Is that fun?
That's not.
I
really
just
fun.
ordered the duck roulettes. Get a video.
It's not going to make us any more likable. Anyway, patreon.com/omnibus project.
Listeners, from our vantage point here, not high above the earth, but in your distant past, we have no idea how long our civilization survived. Shatner thinks it's doomed, but we hope and pray that the catastrophe we fear may never come. The worst comes soon. However, this recording, like all our recordings, may be our final word. But if Providence allows, we hope to be back with you soon for another entry in the Omnibus.